In today's video, we are going to be reviewing this thing right here, which is the DJI Mini 4. Yes, it is the brand new drone from DJI, sub 250 grams. It's got a new look, it's got new features, intelligent flight modes, and we're going to talk all about it. Let's get to it. All right, the first thing you'll notice from this drone here is that we have omnidirectional obstacle avoidance. And yes, that is not something that we had on the previous model. This was always reserved for the higher end, the Air and then the Mavic series from DJI. They decided to put it on the Mini 4, which is really cool, I think. They've also redesigned the front legs. I don't know if you remember when we did our review of the Mini 3, we actually 3D printed some legs because, well, it had a tendency to wobble when it landed because it would only land right here. So they kind of listened and put little legs right here in the front. Otherwise, the look of the aircraft is very, very close to the DJI Mini 3. Now, on the inside, we also see OcuSync 4 or O4, as they like to call it. This is the brand new, newest technology from DJI for transmission that we saw on the Air 3. And then at the bottom, you will notice that there's now a light. That wasn't the case on the Mini 3 or on the Mini 2. So you can light up the bottom of your landing area. And then also, these in the back here have been redesigned. Now there's a status light on the back of the aircraft. In the software in itself, we see the ability to support custom folders and custom file naming. This was introduced with the Mavic 3 series, so Mavic 3, Air 3, and now the Mini 4. And I'm really excited about it because we do a lot of testing. We do a lot of flying with a lot of different DJI drones. And at the end of the day, we always end up with the same file names because it starts at DJI001.jpg or 0001.mov. Now you have the ability to add a date, for example. So you can do DJI, add a full date, and then add a number at the very end. And then you have files that are very unique. And also what we see coming from the Mavic 3 and the Air 3 is waypoints. So this thing is loaded, quite frankly. I'm really impressed. Usually DJI holds back on putting features on the Mini because, well, it's the lowest of their offering, if you want, and they try to get people to upgrade to the next level. In this case, they didn't. So it feels like almost what they're doing is that they're using one camera for the Mini, 2 cameras for the Air, and then 3 cameras for the Mavic series. And it feels like that's going to be the differentiator going forward. Now, as far as comparing this to the Air 2S, the Mini 3 Pro, the Air 3, we noticed that this is also 249 grams if you use the specific battery. Now, in the battery set that we received from DJI, we actually did not have a small battery. They only give us the big battery. They did this with the Mini 3, which means that with the Mini 3, you can get more flight time and go over 250 grams. But if you're interested in staying under 250 grams because you don't want remote ID or maybe you want to fly in different countries that have different regulation for smaller drones, then you can get the smaller battery and then stay compliant. Now, as far as flight time, this is really interesting. We found a slight decrease in flight time using the long battery. It went from 47 minutes on the Mini 3 Pro to 45 minutes. Now, my guess is that the introduction of the sensors here is actually burning a little bit more battery and maybe adding a little bit more weight. We were actually surprised to put this on the scale and find that it was 251 grams. Now, it could be also our scale that's off by 1 or 2 grams. Now, there's only one camera, I mentioned this, and that camera will be doing a 2x zoom and 3x zoom using digital zooming, not using the glass on the inside like we see on other drones from DJI, but it's a small package and it's got quite a few things. Now let's talk about the sensor. This sensor is 1/1.3 inches CMOS sensor, 12 megapixel, 48 megapixel, depending on how you set up your camera. This is actually the same sensor size that we see on the Mini 3 Pro, on the Air 3, and then also on some of the cameras for the Mavic. It's smaller than the 1-inch sensor that we saw on the Air 2S a couple years ago. But quite frankly, from our testing in the past, and you'll see the results in a minute, it packs a lot of really good quality. So at this stage, it's very difficult to see a difference in image quality since the Mavic 3, the Air 3, and then even the Mini 3 Pro, and then now the Mini 4 Pro, we're having a hard time to distinguish between the footage. Obviously, the Mavic 3 that has the bigger sensor, the 4/3 sensor, you're gonna be able to get a lot more out of the image. But for the other 3 model, it's coming really, really close. Now let's get to the testing. Every time we get a drone from DJI, we put it through a series of different tests, including flight time. So we fly it right here, actually on our cyclorama. This is kind of an environment that is controlled. We have the same temperature year long. We also have Slightly different pressure outside, but the same altitude, same elevation. So we tend to get pretty consistent results over time. Now with the small battery, which is advertised at 34 minutes, we were able to get a total flight time of 23 minutes and 31 seconds. Now you might say, whoa, that's a big difference. Keep in mind that we are actually at 5,000 feet elevation, and depending on the pressure outside, we could be at a slightly equivalent higher altitude. So 23 minutes is actually not bad considering the difference in altitude and performance. Now we got a forced landing indicator at 23 minutes and 29 seconds. And then before that, we had the low battery warning at 19 minutes and 24 seconds. Now, when you swap that battery for the larger battery, which is a bit heavier because, well, it packs a bit more charge, that one is advertised for 45 minutes. We were able to get 34 minutes. So again, kind of 10 minutes less than what the advertised flight time is. We got a low battery warning at 29:44 and then a forced landing at 34:32. And then we were able to keep it up in the air for only 2 seconds before it landed. And it did the same thing for the small battery. Now, to be noted, this is interesting. This battery is the same as the Mini 3 Pro, which means that if you have a bunch of batteries from the Mini 3, they will fit in here. Thank you, DJI, for not creating yet another set of batteries because, well, it kind of gets annoying to have to buy all these batteries every time. Now, as far as decibels, 70 decibels from 1 foot away and then 50 decibels from 10 feet away is what we measured here in our controlled environment. Now, when we get this thing from DJI, it came with, well, quite a few things. You can see here, it came with this charger, which has information about how much the battery is charged. And then you have the ability to plug it in. Now, we didn't get a brick with it. We have plenty of bricks here, but if you're looking to get a brick, make sure that you understand what you're buying first. Now, when we get them from DJI, it's not always the final package. So make sure that you read and when we were reviewing the Air 3, for example, people told us, well, you had a brick, but we didn't have a brick in one of the package. So make sure that you understand what you're getting. And then it comes with this bag, like a faux denim, I would call it. It's a pretty familiar bag if you've seen some of the other DJI drones. I like it. It's pretty compact. It's pretty padded, actually. So you can put everything in here, get on the go, and it's fairly small. I don't always like the shoulder strap. I wish there was a little handle at the top so you can just carry it. This always gets kind of in the way of opening it and whatever. So I wish they would put just a little handle on the top right here. But otherwise, I think the bag is pretty standard here. It also comes with 2 cables. You have a USB-A to USB-C and a USB-C to USB-C, which means that if you get one of the brand new iPhone 15, then you can now charge your phone with it. And then we also received the Mini 4 Pro ND filter set right here, which is only 3 filters, and I was surprised at the density. ND16, ND64, and ND256. Listen, DJI, nobody uses ND256, except maybe Billy Kyle when he does his cool hyperlapse.
Hey everyone, my name is Billy Kyle.
But ND32 is what people want. So you need to give us ND32. We were testing this thing in Colorado a couple days ago, and I kept wanting to have an ND32. So if you're listening, DJI, please give us an ND32. We will be doing testing on this. I have a video coming up. I did the density testing and then the color testing on these sets. They actually turn out to be pretty good so far from the prelim review that I've done. And then also they gave us this wide angle lens that you can put on top of the lens right here, and then it's going to look from further back and give you the ability to get more footage into the frame. It's a 0.65x. So you do the math depending on what the actual focal length is on this thing, multiply that by 0.65, and that's going to give you the final one. So I don't think these come in a package. You'll have to buy them separately. We're still doing a review on these, so I'll let you know when we come up with it. And then the last thing, which I'm going to get to right now, is this thing, which is the controller. This is the new DJI RC2, okay? This will also be available with the RC-N2, which unfortunately we don't have one in the office. The RC2 and the RC-N2 were introduced with the Air 3 recently, and we haven't had a chance to get the RC-N2. The RC-N2 is the same one, except it doesn't have a screen in here, and it's cheaper, obviously. But the RC2 here, this is something that I actually really enjoy. The only thing after flying in Colorado the last couple days, I wish there was a way to have heated handles right here.
It's cold, people.
So anybody who's listening, who wants to be an entrepreneur, make sure that you design something where you can have heated handles right here. It would be awesome, because I was doing a hyperlapse and my fingers were literally freezing as we were flying early morning. This controller, the RC2, is kind of in between the RCN version, RCN1 and RCN2. And in the RC Pro, we haven't seen a new version of the RC Pro, which I think a lot of people are waiting for. The RC Pro is a little bit more expensive, but it's got more features. Now on here, we have OcuSync 4, 2.4, 5.8 gigahertz, and then the transmission is at 1080p at 30 frames per second. And the difference between this and the RC Pro is going to be that there's no 5D button right here, so you can navigate. Quite frankly, I never use it, so I don't really care. There's also no navigation button. There is like a back and then an enter maybe button on the RC Pro. I also don't use these a whole lot. I usually just tap on the screen. And it's not as bright. This is 700 nits. The RC Pro is 1000 nits. And then it's got no HDMI out. And then also you cannot install any kind of third-party apps on this controller here. You can on the RC Pro, but you cannot on this. This is kind of an enclosed environment. Okay, let's get this out of the way and let's talk about the camera on this thing here. And we have an aperture of f1.7, which is fixed. It's bright. We were flying early in the morning, and it was really nice to have that much light getting in. It's a 1/1.3 inch CMOS sensor. It's about a 3/4 of an inch if you do the math, and it's 12 to 48 megapixel. Now, something slightly different in this, if you're used to the Mini 3 Pro, is that you can go in the app directly and select 12 or 48 megapixel by going into the settings. In the past, in the Mini 3 Pro, you had to go into the photo mode, and then here there was a normal mode, and then there was a 48 megapixel mode. I don't know which one I prefer the best, quite frankly, but it's nice to see exactly what you're selecting when you find the settings for your image. And then just like the Mini 3 Pro, but unlike the Air 3, you have the ability to move the camera into a vertical mode. So it physically moves the camera. In the Air 3, it actually crops the image, but here you can actually move the camera fully, which I like better. Why? Because it actually gives you a bigger field of view. If you only crop this way, you actually miss a big portion of the top and the bottom that you would get if you actually turn the camera. So this is much better at getting the entire image rather than just cropping. Now, as far as photos in here, we have a photo mode. You can go from ISO 100 to ISO 6400, a shutter speed of 1/16,000. That's really fast, and to 2 seconds. And then JPEG, DNG, which is the raw format, or JPEG and DNG. When I take photos, I like to use JPEG and DNG, so you have access to both of the files. If you need a quick image, it's right there in JPEG. But if you want to work on it, then you can use the DNG. Now, there's a few different photo modes available other than the single, which is going to take a single photo, where you can change between 12 and 48. You can actually do AEB, auto exposure bracketing, which means it takes 3, 5, or 7 images in a row of the same subject with different exposure. That's going to allow you to do HDR, high dynamic range photos. I was actually surprised to see on this thing that you have the ability to do 7 images. This is pretty rare in a drone. Typically, we've seen 3 and 5, but never 7. So it's pretty cool. And then you can do time photos. So every so often, it's going to take an image, or you can do a burst where it's going to take a lot of photos at the same time. So these are pretty typical photo modes that are available on drones these days. Other than the AEB 7, I don't think I see any changes in here. Now, switching to the video mode, we have the normal mode where you can do 4K and 1080 at 60 frames per second. You can switch between ISO 100 to ISO 6400. We also have a night mode, which we've tested in Colorado early in the morning, and the results were just really good. I was actually very impressed. We switched it from manual mode to auto mode because I wanted to see the difference between the two. The only downside, if there is a downside, but is that in night mode, you can only go to 30 frames per second, not 60. That has to do with the amount of light that gets in. So it kind of makes sense. When you go to 60 frames per second, you need that much more light to be able to expose the image at 1/120. But In night mode, you can go all the way to 12,800 for the ISO, even though there's going to be a lot of noise when you get to that level. Now, something else that I want to talk about is on the video section, we now have the ability to do D-Log-M, the log format to take videos. On the Mini 3 Pro, we had D-Cine-like, which is not as good as log. This will give you the ability here to do D-Log-M, which is the same that we saw in the Mavic 3 series and then in the Air 3 series. So that's a cool addition for a small drone like this to have the ability to do D-Log. I think that's pretty cool. And then in here for video mode, you have slow motion where you can do 4K at 100 frames per second or 1080 at 200 frames per second. And then you can go between ISO 100 and ISO 6400 when you do that. Now you might be wondering, what does the image quality look like? Well, we put our camera test chart right here in the back and we take a bunch of pictures, and let's take a look at the results because, well, they were pretty cool. All right, well, the first test that we do is we go to our camera chart in our studio where we have kind of even lighting set up for our camera to take pictures. And what I'm doing here, I'm comparing the 12 megapixel function and the 48 megapixel at different ISO. Now at ISO 100, not a whole lot that I can tell you. It's a bit sharper on the 48 megapixel side, but it also has a tiny little bit more grain at this stage, hardly noticeable unless you're looking really close. Now remember, this is pretty zoomed in onto our chart here. We're trying to look at details. At ISO 200, we start to see a bit more grain as well. Still not a whole lot of difference, I think, at this stage. At ISO 400, we start to see more grainy at 48 megapixel on the right side, and then a bit more mushy, I would say, on the left side at 12 megapixel. And then as we go to ISO 800, I think the difference is hardly noticeable, a bit more grain again on the right side at 48 megapixel. And then at 1600, you can see here, you can start to see a bit of a difference. Here the image really starts to deteriorate on both sides, which is expected. ISO 3200 on a small sensor like this, you can really see quite a bit difference. And then there is no ISO 6400 at 48 megapixel. So I'm showing you ISO 3200 compared to ISO 6400. I figured I would get something to compare to, but they're pretty close. I think you can see the M on the magenta is kind of gone at 6400 ISO, which kind of makes sense. But yeah, very similar results here. Now, moving on to a different part of the chart. This I like because usually the top pattern is where we start to see a big mush usually of lines. There's no detail of lines. The Mini 3 Pro, this is the Mini 4, but the Mini 3 Pro always did really well on this portion of the chart. And I have to say that the Mini 4 is actually doing well as well. We see other cameras actually fail at this section at representing anything. But here we have actually some lines, obviously crispier at 48 megapixel than at 12, which kind of makes sense. Here at ISO 200, you see the same kind of pattern. Now, when we start to increase, what you will see, not so much at ISO 400, but at 800, we start to see a little bit of artifacts in between the lines in the 48 megapixel side. We have like a little bit of a blue dot that appears every once in a while. And then here it starts to get pretty mushy on either side, quite frankly. Again, ISO 1600, probably something you want to stay away from just because it's, well, it's not really, it's available, but it's not something that you're going to be using necessarily. And then those lines really disappear completely on either side, on the very top at least. And then when we compare 6400 with 3200, pretty similar results, just a slightly different type of sharpening, I think, that's happening between the two. Now, another section here of our chart, which is a big torture test, especially that very middle portion here that looks a little bit orange / purple, that usually doesn't do well with any cameras, but in real life it's just a bunch of very small squares, but it's like I said, it's a good torture test. What I noticed on the left side on the 12 megapixel is a bit more artifact on the upper part of that grid, that top row in the middle. There's some red blotches, I would call them. And then in that inverted E, there's also in the top right corner a little bit of blotches on the 12 megapixel. When we go to ISO 200, again, those artifacts turn into yellow. You see it on the top row, there's some yellow artifacts here. Not so much at 48 megapixel. We see some yellow again at ISO 400. And then once we get to ISO 800, those artifacts kind of disappear, which tells me that this is probably the dual native ISO. This camera has dual native ISO. We couldn't get the actual value for what it was, but my guess is 800 because that's what it was on the Mini 3 as well. And a little bit more grain on the 48 megapixel on the right side, but barely noticeable, I would say. Again, remember, we're very, very zoomed in here. Again, we see here ISO 1600, we see some yellow artifacts on the 12 megapixel, not so much on the 48. And then at 3200, more artifacts, more grain on the right side. So you pick your battle, you pick whichever one you prefer, either grain or artifacts. And then at 6400 compared to 3200, the results are pretty similar here. Now, going into the grass, I'll go through that one a little bit quicker because I don't think it's as noticeable. The right side is a bit sharper on the 48 megapixel. I think that's normal because we just have more. The sharpening here happens pretty quickly. The virtual or the digital sharpening, I should call it, happens pretty quickly on the right side. And especially when we get to 1600, the left side at 12 megapixel doesn't seem to have as much grain. We don't have a whole lot of detail, but grass is actually pretty difficult. And then here at 3200, you see there's a red blotch right in the middle of the screen that we don't see on the left side. And then slightly different color changes. You notice the grass is not the same green. Look, before and after 1600, 3200. I found that really interesting. And then here is 6400 versus 3200, just not a whole lot of detail. And then we went outside and we took some pictures here. And this was in Colorado. So this is the overall picture. We did it between the Mini 3 Pro at 12 megapixel and the Mini 4 Pro at 12 megapixel. I wanted to compare these two drones. We'll have more of a comparison in the future. Keep in mind, slightly different exposure. It's always difficult to expose exactly the same for these two different drones and have the exact same vantage point either. But if we zoom in onto the area here, it's very difficult to tell which one is better than the other. To me, they look exactly the same, which would make sense. Slightly, same sensor size, not exactly the same sensor, but same sensor size. These were taken within minutes of each other, and so very, very comparable. Here is another portion of the image that I zoomed in. You can see a little bit of fall colors are starting to come in, but as far as details, I don't think there is one clear winner on either side. Here's another picture. Again, that's kind of the general view right here before we go on and zoom in. We'll make these pictures available for you in the description so you can compare them yourself and play with them. These are all TIFF files, by the way, that are exported directly from a RAW file. And so there is no loss in compression, and I haven't changed any of the settings. I'm keeping them exactly the same so we can easily compare. But here, again, very difficult to say which one is what. And as far as detail, I really can't see a difference, and I'm looking at them closely. Here's a detail of one of the areas on the rocks. Again, not a whole lot of difference. And then this is a really close up. I get really close to the rock and then took the pictures in the same spot. And maybe a little bit more shadows, but that could also be because of lighting or one of the setting and shutter speed, but very, very close in details. And then here's another section here. I like to use the edges because there is foreground and background in this shot. Not a whole lot of difference. Here's another shot. This was in the morning that we did that in Colorado. We flew the drones next to each other with Jason and we took the picture at the same time. So these were taken at the exact same second with the same exact lighting. And as we close in, you can see little bit of difference. It could also be the focus point here, but if we look at the other images, it's really, really close in terms of sharpness and image quality. Now here we're going to change a little bit the comparison. This is the Mini 4. For both of them, on the left side you have 12 megapixel, and then on the right side you have 48 megapixel. It's the same exact image. I took them one after the other, switching the setting. And then as we zoom in, what I find interesting here is that the 48 megapixel has a bit more artifact. You see obviously more sharpness, which was added in post, not by me, but by the camera in itself. These are straight out of the sensor. I haven't changed anything. But you can see like more, I would say like emerald color, kind of a green bluish color artifact all over in the shadows, something that we don't see on the 12 megapixel side. Obviously, the left side, the 12 megapixel, doesn't appear as sharp, but I think that's because they don't have that added sharpening, digital sharpening added by the camera. Same thing here as we zoom into a different area. Again, we see this kind of emerald green looking additional sharpening from the camera on the 48 megapixel. I'm not a big fan of that, quite frankly. I think a lot of cameras do that. We've seen that in the Mini 3 in the past. We've seen that also in Autel. Autel was doing the same thing with the Mini, or their Mini version. So yeah, same idea. Here's another picture, again 12 megapixel on the left, 48 megapixel on the right, and I'm going to zoom into different areas. The sharpening is interesting. You see in the blue sky a little bit more artifacts and noise, and then you see that the trees just look like they've been painted with a brush, a very thin brush. Also a bit more artifact as well, with some maybe pink/green artifact on the right side that doesn't appear on the left side. I think that's kind of interesting. And here it is again. It looks like well, you can see the difference between those two here as we zoom in. I think there is purple artifacts on both sides here, but again, we're zoomed in quite a bit, so definitely being nitpicky, but if you wanted to compare the quality between the two. And then here's one more shot. This was early in the morning, very low light, and here you can see again the sharpening on the right side at 48 megapixel. The tree on the left is a bit more blurry, but that's expected with a quarter of the pixels available. And then here again, this is kind of a darker area of the image, more on the edge of the lens as well. And so you can see the difference and make up your own decision here as to whether you like one better than the other.
Now let's take a look at the intelligent flight modes for this drone. Now historically, the Mini was never really a model that got a lot of intelligent flight modes. You had to go to the Air model or to the Mavic model in order to get this. But now we see quite a few things, including the cinematic and normal and sport. That's no different, something you can change on the controller here to change the speed of the aircraft as it operates. And then you have panoramas, so you can do a sphere, a 180, a wide angle, or vertical. That's pretty standard. We have our quick shots, so they've added the entire list here of 6 quick shots. We have the droney, the rocket, the circle, the helix, the boomerang, and the asteroid. These are semi-automated or fully automated mode, I guess you can call them. Now we also see hyperlapse on this drone with the 4 different modes. You can hand fly the drone in hyperlapse mode. You can do, and it's called free. You can do a circle, so it's going to rotate around an object. You can do course lock, where it's going to maintain the same heading, and then you'll be able to rotate the drone around that specific heading. So the drone is going to continue moving in this direction, but you'll be able to orient it towards whatever you want. And then we have waypoints, where you'll be able to put waypoints into the drone in itself and then fly it around. Another cool intelligent flight mode that we, until 2 drones ago with the Mavic 3 and the Air 3, hadn't really seen on DJI drones, is the ability to do waypoints. And so you can record your waypoints and then re-record the same scene over and over again. Now, it's not extremely precise like it would be on the Inspire 3, for example. The Inspire 3 is using this RTK precision level to do these waypoints. But this is really cool. If you wanted to do the same shot from 1 week to the other, or 1 month to the other, or 1 season to the other, you can set it up in here, do the footage, come back a few months later, and then do the footage again. So then you have your waypoints that are saved. If you're familiar with Litchi has been doing this for a long time, but now you can also do it directly in here. So that's a cool addition as far as, again, for a mini drone, these are features that we never really saw available on this kind of drone in the past. We also have follow mode, which is, I think, new to the Mini series. We have the ability to do active track 360, which is even new from the Air 3. The Air 3 had the ability to do this, but now they have this thing called 360. And what you can do with this is you can select an object and then you can fully rotate around them. But even better, on the controller here, you can select where you want the camera to move and in which direction you want the camera to move. In the past, you could select left, right, front, back. Now you can actually select a distance. There's 2 levels of distance, closer or further back, and then also select in which direction you want it to move. So if you wanted to go from the back to the front left, but you want to go to the right first, right, front, and then front left. Well, you can do that in the app, and it's going to show you. It's as easy as putting your finger down on the controller and then moving it around to where you want the drone to go, and it's going to draw this green line, which is going to show you which way the drone is going. Now, the ability to kind of put your finger on here is called a trace wheel interface. That's what DJI calls it. So if you see that term, you know what it refers to. It's kind of new. We haven't seen it in other DJI drones in the past. Now, we tested it trying to chase Ethan in the parking lot on the one wheel. And I have to say, I'm not as impressed with this as I was with the Mavic 3 as far as active track. The Mavic 3 was just amazing at keeping him in the track, in the frame, and not losing him. He was able to lose the drone a couple times by just going between trees and going between obstacles. I was impressed at how fast it was going to correct. A couple times we had a close call, but it did great at realizing that there was something going on and at avoiding it. We have a lot of trees and tall poles in the parking lot right here behind our office, and it was pretty cool to see what it did. I was not, as I said, super impressed with the drone losing the subject a couple times when, well, I don't think it should have. Now, in addition to the Active Track 360, you have the ability to also do a point of interest. So you're going to select someone on the screen or something on the screen, and then pick going either clockwise or counterclockwise. And then from here, you'll be able to go faster or slower as the drone kind of rotates around that person as a point of interest. And then you'll also be able to go further away from them using the sticks on here, and then climb or descend as well using the sticks right here. So you have a bit more freedom. So if you wanted to do kind of a point of interest rotation from pretty far and then get closer and maybe climb a little bit, well, the camera is going to do all that for you. Yeah, it's a cool feature. I like that. I think it helps to make some pretty cool cinematic footage if you want. Now let's talk about some of the safety features on here. We have the good old return to home system from DJI, the same that we've seen for the last couple drones. So it's got the ability to come back if you decide to come back. So you're going to push on the home button right here. It's going to come back to a predetermined altitude and then land where you took off from. It's got the ability to do this in case you lose the signal. So after so many seconds, it's going to basically come back and trace its track back to where you started. Or if you had low battery, if you get to the point where your battery may not be enough, it's going to force you to come back and return to home. So now one of the cool things that DJI added to this return to home functionality is that when you hit return to home, you will be able to see kind of a 3D path of where the drone is going to go in order to return to home, which is cool because you can visualize it. Kind of gives you this green overlay path on top of the image on the controller here. Obviously, that's if you have an image. If you lost the signal between the drone and the controller, you're not going to see it. But if you did like a return to home by hand, or if you had low battery, for example, it's going to show you exactly where it's going to go. So you can see on here if there's an obstacle in the way and this isn't going to pick up the obstacle, then maybe you can avoid it by hand. It should. This is designed to avoid obstacle even during return to home. But I thought that was a cool addition. This is something that we saw being updated recently on the Mavic 3 series. They added that same functionality, and then now it's available in the Mini 4 Pro as well. These are great safety features. I think it's saved a lot of people over time when they maybe lose the signal because they go a little bit beyond visual line of sight. This is really going to help them. Now, there's also the emergency prop stop on here as a safety feature. We've seen this on all the DJI drones. I'm going to say this from experience. Make sure that you have it set up only in case of emergencies, which means that if the drone, for example, was to get into an attitude that is pretty dangerous, then it's going to shut down the motors. You see some people doing this when the hand land, they grab the drone and then they kind of twist it to the side. That's what the emergency prop stop is. If you set it to any time, then anytime you're going to do this combo right here or this combo right here, then the motors are going to stop in flight, and that's not a good thing. And we unfortunately had lost a drone because of this, because somebody in our office set it up and we didn't know. And then we were doing a maneuver that included moving the stick just like this, and then the motor stopped in flight. That was a DJI Mavic 3 Cine, which was not a cheap drone. We also have, for a safety feature, depending on who you ask, the geozones. So DJI has its geozone system, no different in here. You won't be able to fly close to airports unless you have some kind of approval from DJI. Some people hate it. I don't know if some people love it, but some people are okay with it. But yeah, it is what it is. It's available in this drone as well. This does not have AirSense. AirSense is the technology that is going to capture aircraft as they're flying nearby. And when I say aircraft, manned aircraft, large aircraft, as they're flying nearby when they broadcast ADS-B, which is the technology that includes information of the altitude of the aircraft, the direction of flight. This does not have it. DJI has said that they would put it in all of their drones over 250 grams. Now, you could argue that this is over 250 grams with some of the batteries, but yeah, it is not available in this one. I really wish, quite frankly, that this was available in all DJI drones, in all drones that are sold anywhere, just because I think it's a great feature. It's not fail-proof, but it's great to know that there is another aircraft flying nearby and that you should be paying attention. And you might be asking, yes, it is remote ID compliant, even though I know that you don't need it if you fly recreationally under 250 grams. You technically don't need remote ID, but because this drone can also be larger than 250 grams, heavier than 250 grams, by law, DJI has to make remote ID available in it. It does broadcast. At this time, because this is a pre-release model, it is not on the DOC list, the Declaration of Compliance list from the FAA. But by the time this video goes live, it might be. So make sure that you check that list. But it does broadcast. We have been testing it, and it does send a remote ID signal. All right, we get to the end of the review now. Let's talk about our final thoughts for this drone. The first thing is the ability to do log footage with vertical shooting at the same time as well. I think that's really cool. Both of these features being available on this drone. The waypoint is a great addition as well. I was not really expecting that to show up on the Mini series. The Active Track 360 was impressive for that small of a drone, not up to the level, I think, of the Mavic. But again, this is a much cheaper platform. And then coming with that is the omnidirectional obstacle avoidance. Again, this is something that we never saw really before on the Mini drone. So DJI is taking it up to the next level on such a small platform, sub 250 grams. You have all that technology available. And then the fact that these arms right here, this might be a small thing, but that these arms right here are no longer kind of rocking on landing and potentially touching the propeller on the ground when you land. That's a good thing. So thank you for adding these little legs right here. Now I was actually impressed because I thought that if you did that out of order, opening and closing the legs, you wouldn't be able to do it because that's how it's been on other DJI drones because of the legs. But you can still open them in whatever order you want or close them in whatever order you want. You still have the ability to open the drone. So that's cool. That was a smart design. And then the last thing is those arm LEDs here in the back. that's pretty cool because at night you'll be able to kind of see the status of the aircraft a little bit more clearly. Some things that I really didn't care for, the shorter flight time on the extended battery, I thought it was disappointing. I can understand why, because I think there's a bit more technology in here, but and they're using the same battery, so it's kind of a trade-off. The inability to fly this using the DJI RC controller or the RC Pro, so you have to buy the RC2 controller, which I think it would be nice to see a bit more compatibility with those controllers. And then no changes in the sensor size. We've seen the Mini 3 Pro, the Mini 4 Pro now, and then the Air 3, all using the same sensor. Now, granted, it does give you great quality, but I was hoping that we would have a bit of an upgrade here, hopefully. And then lastly, this really, I think, was very petty on DJI's part, but these filters don't work on the 3, and the filters from the DJI Mini 3 Pro don't work on the Mini 4. And you know the reason why is because there's tiny little tabs right here, and they're slightly different. And I thought that was extremely petty. I was looking forward to using some of our sensors or even using like this wide angle thing here on the Mini 3. It doesn't work. And so what a disappointment. Why do this? I don't really understand why DJI would decide to do this, but again, that's that's what I'm gonna end with. So thank you for watching. I'm gonna leave you with a comparative video of footage between the Mini 3 Pro, the Mini 4 Pro, and then the Air 3 as well, so you can see the difference in quality. Keep in mind, they all have the same sensor size. So enjoy that.